You know, this is one of my favorite times of the year. If you love to fish, I mean, this early June time frame, mid-June, it's really, it's really as good as it gets. Water temperatures are starting to hang in that low 60s to mid 60s, and a lot of things start to happen. But with that being said, you know, some of these fish start to move from that traditional post-spawn location to more of the midsummer patterns. And so this time of year, you know, on a lot of different walleye fisheries, it's really tough to beat a bottom bouncer and spinner. Now, one of the questions that we've been getting asked a lot is, when do you try to use some of the soft plastic tipping options versus, say, a traditional night crawler or a minnow or a leech, some type of live bait? I would never say that some of the soft plastic options would always outfish live bait, because there's a time and place for everything, okay? There's just some tough bites where you try different things and you keep trying different things until one thing works, and then you roll with it. You never know what that's gonna be until you're out on the water that day. But as a rule of thumb, you know, some situations where I'm using a lot of the soft plastic, this year's the Eye Candy Rigging Leech. That's probably one of my favorite tipping options. Some people use gulp night crawlers. There's different things that you can use, but I just find that the Eye Candy is just so soft. It has a lot better action than anything else that I've ever used. Situations where this type of material can shine is, first off, whenever you're dealing with a situation where there's a lot of young of the year fish that are pecking at your presentation and ruining your efficiency. More specifically, if you have a bunch of stunted perch that are nipping at your night crawler, tearing it up. If you've got little bluegills, a bunch of small drum, whatever it is, if you've got small fish that aren't your intended target and they're just nipping at the back of that night crawler until you have nothing left, that's a situation where the Eye Candy can be a big advantage, okay? Another situation is sometimes, you know, especially as summer progresses, it seems like sometimes you can go over fish and have a real hard time catching them to bite, and then you pick up your speed and you get some of the most violent strikes that you could imagine, okay? There's times where speed is your best friend for catching summer walleyes, where you can definitely fish too slow. And so especially like with spinner harnesses, you know, when we have to kick up our speed to, say, 1.5 miles an hour, or maybe even 1.2, 1.3 miles an hour or faster, that's a situation where the soft plastic like Eye Candy can be a big advantage, because you get that vibration, you get that flutter behind the harness, and that presentation's moving fast enough where these fish don't have a lot of time to inspect it. Third situation where I really like to use the Eye Candy over traditional live bait, whenever I'm fishing in heavy weeds. If I'm running through stalks of cabbage, any type of weed contact where if you're getting fouled up in weeds once in a while, every time you make contact with a weed, a lot of times if you're using live bait, it's going to foul up your presentation. And so one of my favorite things to do in the summer, when the weeds start to pop up and those fish are, especially if they're on the outside edge of the weeds or if they're in the pockets, I'll run a big bottom bouncer and use that as a weed guard, and then run a short snell behind the bottom bouncer, and then run the Eye Candy on the harness, and just because it's so durable, okay? And that's probably the biggest thing, is you've got profile, you've got action, but then you also have durability, in the sense you can catch, you know, 10 to 15 fish on one piece of plastic, sometimes more, okay? But you don't have to worry about them tearing off, and you don't have to worry about them really getting fouled up. And so those are some of the advantages of using the Eye Candy Rigging Leech. So here's the basics as far as how I like to rig the Eye Candy Rigging Leech on a spinner harness. Usually I like to use a 2-hook harness. You don't always have to use a 2-hook harness, but I like to just hook the nose right through the front, just like if it was a real leech. And then I run this back hook, and I actually run it all the way through, just so that it can dangle just like that. And I just find that it just gives that leech a real nice flutter. And you can use a single hook with these, especially if, you know, the fish are biting really aggressively, but typically a 2-hook harness is going to hook up with fish really well. Probably the biggest reason that I often use Eye Candy is that, let's face it, I mean, there's times of the year where the bite is really good. And typically this is one of those times of the year, you know, early summer, you know, these fish are aggressive. And so what I find, or my reasoning, is that if fish are biting just about anything, then whatever you can use that's the most efficient is going to help you catch more fish. When you have situations where, yeah, you can catch fish on minnows, you can catch fish on a crawler, you can catch fish on this and that, it doesn't really matter, that's a perfect opportunity to use Eye Candy, because you're going to be so much more efficient. And catching fish is about efficiency. Every second that you fish without live bait, or if your live bait's fouled up, or if your night crawler's chewed down to nothing, whatever it is, you could just well be sitting on the couch. And so because of the durability of Eye Candy, you know, you're always in the water fishing. You know, you don't lose the baits. The baits don't tear off like traditional live bait. And so there are times where with good fishing, when everything's working, where the efficiencies of soft plastics shine. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest reasons to use eye candy different times of the year. If it doesn't matter what color, if it doesn't matter on a lot of things, you're going to catch more fish by simply keeping your lines in the water.